Israeli military says Yahya Sinwar was killed during an operation inside Gaza. Sinwar is believed to be the architect behind the October 7th terror attack on Israel. His death is extraordinarily significant for the entire conflict throughout the Middle East.
President Biden released a statement a short time ago saying, quote, "There is now the opportunity for a day after in Gaza without Hamas in power and for a political settlement that provides a better future for Israelis and Palestinians alike." NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley is with us in Beirut, Lebanon. Matt, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke earlier about Sinwar's death. What do we know about the operation that killed him?
Yeah, well, there wasn't much to say about the operation when Netanyahu was speaking, but we know that Yahya Sinwar was caught in the southern city of Rafah. This is the city that sits right on the border between the Gaza Strip and Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. It's been the scene of a lot of fighting over the past several months, and we know that he doesn't sound like he was inside one of those tunnels. It doesn't sound like he was necessarily targeted in this particular operation. It looks as though, and according to our reporting from officials in Washington, from our team in Washington, that this was kind of a lucky get by the Israelis. They finally stumbled upon Yahya Sinwar, and he wasn't necessarily underground, hiding among hostages or civilians, as the Israelis have constantly alleged. Instead, it looks as though he was above ground. We don't know exactly what he was doing or what this led to, but this all happened yesterday. It was only today that there was verification that this was, in fact, Yahya Sinwar's body.
And Matt, earlier today, we saw images of Israeli soldiers passing out sweets to cars passing by to celebrate Sinwar's death. That was before Israel officially confirmed it. So how else is Israel and the region reacting to this news?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be very mixed for Arabs and Palestinians, particularly in the region. Of course, this was a man who had gained some level of popularity outside of the Gaza Strip, and that's worth noting here. It was the people of the Gaza Strip who now have died to the tune of more than 42,000 people, most of them civilians, who had to carry the burden of Yahya Sinwar's decision to launch the incredibly violent and destructive attacks on October 7th that set off this latest round of fighting. But because of that, because he stood up to the Israelis in such a forthright and violent way, he did gain a measure of popularity here in Lebanon and other places in the Arab world. But now, as this destruction has swept across the entire region, and now we're even seeing Iran involved and several other of Iran's proxies or Iranian-backed groups throughout the region, there is, I feel, from my conversations with people here in Lebanon and elsewhere, a certain amount of regret. Even though he is admired for standing up to the Israelis, there is even those who would say that he's a hero for doing that. He's not going to be necessarily someone who's lost. He's not going to be necessarily a character who a lot of people wish had survived. He brought an enormous amount of destruction, and he was willing to put so many Palestinian lives at risk and kill so many Palestinians, the people who he claimed to protect in the cause of trying to liberate Palestine.
And Matt, just briefly, as a practical matter, how might his death impact where you're standing in Beirut, the fighting that's been going on between Hezbollah and Israel, and more broadly, search for peace?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question and one that we've been asking ourselves ever since we heard the news. I mean, it's very difficult to know because all these different theaters of conflict, whether it be Gaza or here in Lebanon or in the Houthis in Yemen, Iraq and Syria, where there are Iran-backed groups who are inimical or fighting against Israel, and also now Iran itself, which we're now waiting to hear what the Israelis are going to do in terms of a retaliation from Israel against Iran. All of these theaters of conflict are all woven together, but at the same time, they're all entirely separate. They're both at the same time, and it's very complicated. So we don't know how Yahya Sinwar's death is going to end. We don't know how the fighting in Gaza is going to end. That is what is going to determine what goes on in the rest of the region. Guys.
Matt Bradley, you always give us such great perspective. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We really are in the final sprint now, just 19 days to go until Election Day.
People across the country already casting their ballots. Early voting began today in the crucial swing state of North Carolina. That's what you see there. Former President Trump is in New York today for the Al Smith Dinner. That's a charity fundraiser which historically has been attended by both the Republican and the Democratic candidates.
Vice President Harris is skipping that event, though. Instead, she is barnstorming in the battleground state of Wisconsin. She just wrapped up her first of 3 events there today. It comes on the heels of her heated interview with Fox News last night. The conversation started off with this exchange over immigration.
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but do you, just a number, do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Brett, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
So your Homeland Security Secretary said that 85% of apprehensions.
I'm not finished.
NBC News Chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander is traveling with the vice president in Wisconsin, and with us here on set, NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard, who covers the Trump campaign. Good to see you both. So, Peter, I want to start with you. The vice president has been on a media blitz all week. What's been this reaction to her Fox interview?
Well, we've heard from the communications director for the Harris campaign saying overnight that they believe she demonstrated the toughness they were hoping she would, that they accomplished what they wanted to, which really was reaching out to those independent and conservative voters, those Fox News viewers who rarely have the opportunity to hear from the vice president without the media filter, as has been the case throughout their broadcast over the course of this campaign cycle. They feel good about where they are right now, but really the message in many ways was focused on a particular demographic. Among those Republicans, the 17% of Republicans who in states like Pennsylvania voted for Nikki Haley, the former presidential candidate who was really opposing Trump throughout the early primary season. They hope that they can peel off a limited number of those Republicans, perhaps as undecided independents, and they think that will help them where every little sliver could matter in these final weeks.
Vaughn, let me turn to you. And of course, the perspective from the Trump campaign and their camp on that interview last night was quite different than what Peter just described. But I also know that Trump took part in the town hall last night for Univision. Talk about what happened there. He raised some eyebrows with some of his comments.
Exactly. And as Peter was just mentioning, those undecided independent voters or reticent conservatives, folks who may see the January 6th attack in the same way that Liz Cheney, when she was on the January 6th Select Committee, showed the American public how that attack unfolded. And I bring that up because in that Univision town hall last night, Donald Trump was asked a very specific question about the way that he views that attack here today. Take a listen to his response.
Nothing done wrong at all. Nothing done wrong. And action was taken, strong action. Ashley Babbitt was killed. Nobody was killed. There were no guns down there. We didn't have guns. The others had guns. But that was a day of love from the standpoint of the millions. It's like hundreds of thousands. It could have been the largest group I've ever spoken before.
Let's be clear, this has really been Donald Trump's defense of his role in the events leading up to January 6th and on the day of the attack for the last 3.5 years. You know, it was on January 6th this year, the anniversary, that I attempted to ask him if he had any regrets about his own actions, and he ignored my question that day. And we have seen Donald Trump misrepresent, frankly, what transpired. 140 police officers were assaulted that day. 5 police officers would end up dying by suicide in the months that followed. There were individuals that beat officers with violent weapons, and yet Donald Trump, he is trying to hold on to his base of support that frankly views that day through a lot of conspiracy theories and a lot of blame shifting here. And yet the Kamala Harris campaign, by going on that Fox interview, believes that there are some conservatives out there, independents, that did not like the actions of that day and continue to point out the fact that Donald Trump has not strayed away from his own defenses of what transpired.
And Peter, I do want to end with you briefly. What events is the vice president taking part in today in Wisconsin?
3 separate events. She's going to be here in La Crosse. Later, we'll end her day in Green Bay. This is her 6th visit to the state of Wisconsin since becoming a presidential candidate. You'll remember she effectively launched her campaign here in late July. And this state is going to be critical in 2020. Joe Biden won by just 20,000 votes. A recent Marquette University Law School poll shows it is a 4-point advantage for Kamala Harris, but that is well within the margin of error. And one day to circle is coming up next week. The Tuesday, the 22nd, is when early voting begins in this state in person. Barack Obama will be here then. Back to you.
All right, Peter Alexander and Vaughn Hilliard, thank you both so much. Let's head now to today's CNBC Money Minute. President Biden